Hello and welcome to the showcase of Bohemian-Moravian Highlands, which is a map that I have been working on for almost 4 years now and that I am finally ready to show to you and ready to release because it is finally finished. Now, what is Bohemian-Moravian Highlands? It's a region in Central Czech Republic, then Czechoslovakia, that is known for its hills, its relative remoteness from great industrial centers, and its really nice villages and small rivers. Now, the region is in reality much larger, but I picked a 20 by 20 kilometers area because this allows me to do the map in 1:1 scale. I was very lucky because at the center of this project lied me discovering an online archive of military maps from early 1960s, which means that I had a very good coverage, map coverage of the whole region in pretty much all scales, from 1 to 10,000 to 1 to 250,000 and quite a few in between, which allowed me to reach quite unparalleled authenticity, I think. Of course, you will be the judge of that, but it allowed me to have correct forests, to have correct roads, to have correct town layouts, and pretty much do everything by the book to make it as real as possible, to give the player as immersive experience as I am able to do with workers and resources. Now, the idea behind the map, despite it of course being authentic and really close to its historical counterpart, is to offer a pre-populated map that not only has realistic landscape and realistic settlements, but also has working infrastructure right from the very beginning, which will allow the player to start not on the border and build the infrastructure up and then slowly expand into the middle of the map, but it will allow him to start in the middle of the map and to essentially play with the villages, with the surroundings, with the forest, with the resources, which will make or should make the experience a little bit more organic. I will also do a video that will show how to start on this map and that will explain some important aspects or important locations in this map, but I will not do it in this video. In the rest of this video, instead, I will talk about the region. I will talk about the terrain, I will talk about the cities, and the point of all this is, of course, to bring the region a little closer to you, to the player, so that it's not really for the player just an unknown region that, you know, you download it from a workshop and then now you have to play, but so that there is some familiarity built right before you start playing the map, and you already have some connections or information about certain locations, certain aspects, some historical background and stuff like that, that will allow you to understand the map a little better. A few words about terrain. Bohemian-Moravian Highlands as a whole are characterized by very small but very numerous hills. There are rolling hills everywhere, and this particular area of the Highlands is centered around Jihlava River. It's this central river that flows from the north to the south and then turns to the east and ends at the southern eastern border. Now, due to limitations that workers and resources have, namely how it works with water, because in workers and resources it pretty much it has water in all the places that are at 0 altitude. However, this is not entirely how it works in real nature, in a real countryside, because rivers, of course, they flow down, so the further you go upstream, the higher
altitude you are in. However, in a game, pretty much all the river has to be at 0 altitude, which means that the topography had to be altered. What this means is that the further north you are, the more different topography is from the real terrain. In particular, the valley in which Jihlava River is much deeper. Just like if you see these hills, they would not be that high, but it just has to make for the altitude somewhere. So I did the alterations, of course, not to make it so obvious. Even places like this distant from the river has been sort of lowered, but the further you get from the river, the more sort of like realistic or more real terrain you get. If you are on the southern part of the map, it should pretty much be okay, not so much on the northern part. But the good thing is that I don't think it's really noticeable. The second thing, of course, is that Jihlava River is larger on the map to make it more visible. Jihlava River is not a big river in real life, so the river that is depicted is around 2 times wider than it would be. In the real Czech Republic. Now, there is a lot of care being put into the terrain, but you might pretty convincingly say, well, but this is not how it looks there, because Bohemian-Moravian Highlands, they look very different in general feel. And you would be right, but the reason for this has nothing to do with topography or forests or anything. It simply has to do with agriculture, and this is a hard limitations, and I think in regards to realistic map building, it's the greatest limitation there is in workers and resources, because in workers and resources the fields are this sort of rectangular shapes that, yes, you can change it by including some buildings which crop the field a little, but you will never get that realistic look. So I would say majority of empty spaces that are present on the map, they would be filled with fields, and some of them, of course, may have grass on it, some may be meadows, but a lot of them would just be brown dirt or yellow crops, stuff like that. But there is just no way to do it in workers and resources, because unfortunately we don't have a paint tool for it. One thing that I decided needs to be done to make the world more believable, which I don't think is really done on other maps, is that I included other rivers and streams as well. So there is the Jihlava, which is a proper river because it's set at 0 altitude, but there is also a lot of streams feeding Jihlava. Now, how to do them? Given that the water can only be at 0 altitude. Well, I decided to do it with rock paint tool. So you will notice that there are these like stripes of rocks that are lined with trees. It is usually also featured on the terrain, so the terrain in these sort of streams is slightly lowered. There is a ditch made, and and I used this to create small rivers everywhere, or it may not even be rivers, it may simply just be stream beds that are empty most of the time, but when large rains come, it suddenly turns into a stream that has actual water in it. To highlight it and make it easier to understand where water is, I used polar trees like these very tall trees, pretty much only to designate water. So if you have this small stream, it is lined with a lot of trees, and it includes polar trees. So you just immediately know that if there is a polar tree, it has something to do with water. And doing these small rivers also, of course, forces bridges over them. So from gameplay perspective, of course, it doesn't make much sense, because you could just build a road, and I think you wouldn't even need to just do digging and like earth shaping. You could just paint the road across it. But I included bridges because they are there in reality, and it just makes the world a lot more closer to what it is. It also works together with villages, because of course villages tend to be very close to sources of water. So not all, but most of the villages are close to these water sources. There is one additional function of these small rivers, but I will talk about it in a section dedicated to sewage water. Also, there are forests. And forests are, of course, very important for economy, because, well, logging happens there, and it's a source of wood. I think I have the forests mapped pretty well. There are some alterations, such as maps at different scales show forests at different, let's say, positions with different shapes. But what I think I achieved is having forests which don't really look natural. Like, of course, it's forest, but at the same time, it looks like humans and human activity had a lot of say in where the forests are and what are they used to. So, as a general rule, you have forests on the hills that would nevertheless be pretty useless for agriculture. So the fields are where it is sort of flat, but if you get to hills, it's full of trees. I use pine trees much more than I used these regular trees, simply because most of these forests would be pines. There is also terracing done. What this means is if you have a slope, it is possible to do agriculture on a slope, but you need to have these sort of natural barriers, because if you wouldn't have them and you would have heavy rain, it would just take the soil, the fertile soil, and cascade it, and it would just flow it downward. So people, of course, did these terraces, which are like both done with trees and also with terrain, and it prevents this destructive effect of rains. And since it's pre-populated map, we also have to talk about population. Czechoslovakia is, and was, in 1960s, a country with an incredible amount of villages. It has, well, I read it somewhere, one of the largest number of settlements per square kilometer, because there is just so many very small villages. This, of course, goes for Bohemian-Moravian Highlands as well. And since I was working with real maps, I had a pretty good idea of the villages included. So you can see on this map that there is a lot of villages present. All the villages that there were are included. I didn't omit any of them. And the maps that I had, they also allowed me to get a good grasp of the shapes and sizes of these villages in the 1960s, because of course I could use contemporary maps, but the villages change. Most of them were much smaller in the 1960s. So each village has its sort of individual shape, and it sort of makes sense. So if you look at the villages, you can sometimes see why the things and the places are where they are. This goes in particular to villages that have small rivers flowing through them, such as Svatoslav here. I did some alterations to the villages, and this has to do particularly with their size. As a general rule, the villages are around 75% as large as they would be in reality, so I made them slightly smaller. The reason was that I was making the villages like 2.5 years ago, and it felt repetitive at the time, so I just made my work a little easier. But now I got back to it, and I could make them larger, but the reason is that the problem is that it would make it harder to service them with bus stations, with stores, and with utilities. Whereas if they stay just somewhat smaller, then they are much more functional. So this is one of the reasons. The second reason, of course, is that I only worked with vanilla buildings, and houses in 1960s would be slightly larger than the houses that are provided in the vanilla game. So it's just that the houses would be of different shapes. They usually would have the back part, so they would be sort of like L-shaped. But I just had to work with what I had. And the third reason why some villages are different is, of course, elevation. You, of course, play Workers and Resources, so you know that the real enemy of Workers and Resources is elevation and building on slopes. And the same goes for map building, and it sometimes imposes limitations that I simply cannot overcome. One of these is Číchov. Číchov is a village that lies on a river and has railway tracks going through the middle of the village. In the real village there is a tunnel. Here it is represented by the bridge because, of course, tunnel can't be used due to how incredibly large the entrances are in the game. So it is modeled by a tunnel, so it works the same way. However, the tunnel would not be here; it would be around here. But I couldn't do it because the game, it just won't allow me to put the road there. So this entire part would really be here, but I couldn't do it. So yeah, but who cares? I mean, it still looks like the real village with the road going around this small church. And yeah, but more of the villages have been changed due to these limits. Now. One of the things that I think contribute quite a lot to the character of these villages are, of course, gardens. Most of the village houses would have at least small gardens behind them, which during socialism, but of course even earlier, would be used to grow some vegetables and some fruits, so the people would have more food and wouldn't be reliant on the things that they would need to buy with money. So if you just look at this village, it's not really that interesting. It just has some central road and then this very long square. And apart from that, it's just village houses. But with these gardens included, it suddenly looks like a village that, well, actually could look that way. So I think it's a huge improvement over how vanilla map does the villages. Villages, as a general rule, have bus stations and grocery stores provided. Some other villages have also schools. Schools are provided where they were, because luckily the maps that I used had schools like included and labeled, so I know which villages had schools and which didn't. And for decoration, sometimes some other services or other buildings are included. So there is a football field and there is a fire station in Přibyslavice, but the different villages have different the different buildings included sometimes. There are also four large settlements, which is Brtnice, Brtnice, Okřížky, and Třebíč. These are large, and they include these city blocks, and they sometimes have some more buildings included, such as kindergarten, which is only in buildings, and technical services, and things that aim to make it look somewhat larger. In Brtnice, for example, there is this large cathedral, which of course still stands. I modeled this like 2 years ago when this building still had red roof, so it looked much more natural. Now it doesn't look that good, but just having the cathedral only on the hill, it wouldn't look nice. The second settlement that is large is Okřížky. I won't talk about the history because it's not that interesting, and I will touch on some of it in a part dealing with railway, because there is a large railway station in Okřížky. And finally, there is Třebíč, as by far the largest city included. Now, the Třebíč is, again, it's slightly smaller than it would be at that time, but at the same time, like, the proportion of Třebíč to all the other settlements is the same as it would be in reality. So on the map, like, you can immediately tell whether a village is, whether it's a super large city or whether it's just a very small village. Now, Třebíč is also divided to a few districts because it's too large to be included in just one settlement. So apart from Třebíč, like central Třebíč, there is also Borovina, Podklášteří, Domky, and Radostín. Yeah. Lastly, as regards these settlements, there are some settlements that have their name put to quotation marks, and it means that it's not a village per se, but it's some important place. So there is Červený Mlýn, which means red mill, and it's one of many mills that were built along Jihlava River. In 1960s, they were already ceasing to have relevance. Some of them were operational and still were making flour, but not all of them. So like this mill. Then there is Dvůr Wartenberg, which was sort of like agricultural estate from 16th or 17th century, or for example Zotavovna Zátiší, which was sort of like a hotel for workers to recreate in all these forests and in the beautiful countryside around. The issue with the last issue that I want to talk about in regards to population is that I, of course, used not only the village houses but regular residential buildings in a place where I just needed some larger buildings. And the problem that this brings is that I can't stop population from being spawned in these buildings, and at the same time, if a person spawns in this building, he is activated. You can prevent activation of all these of the population in village houses if you just don't provide them with a place to go to. But as regards these larger buildings, the population is just active from the get-go. This also means that since these villages are meant to be inactive, these people won't have a place to shop, they won't have their needs met, and they will start to die or escape very quickly. Unfortunately, I haven't found solution, so my best advice is just to switch on the map and let it go for like 3 months on fast forward, because in 3 months like pretty much all the people living in these houses will be gone, and only the inactive people living in village houses will be left, and then you can just start playing as if it was the regular vanilla populated map.
So, the question of industry. Originally, I didn't want to include any industry on the map because I thought that it would make the map less approachable. Because new players would sort of feel the need to use the industry that is provided, so they would lose a lot of time trying to find where it is located, how it's going to work, how to supply it, stuff like that. That would just slow them from just building the industry. But then I thought, well, the industry was actually part of this place, so I decided to include it, even if the players will not use it. Or, well, they can, but they don't need to. Now, the region is not really industrialized one, which is, again, the great thing about the workers and resources, that it gives you this quest to develop heavy industry, which there is none on this map. However, the region had a long history of leatherworking industry, so it is also represented on the map, and you will just find traces of the leatherworking industry on a lot of places. There are 4 places that have some industrial relevance. First is Přibyslavice and Okřížky, then Britnice, and then of course Třebíč. So I will just briefly go over each of them. In Přibyslavice there is a fabric factory, and as regards this region, it is probably the oldest factory there is. It dates back to 18th century, but in reality it was not a fabric factory, it was a paper mill. But I think fabric factory is a really good substitute for a paper mill, because it also needs to be next to a river. The input materials are sort of similar, and also the model for fabric factory looks like it actually might be a factory from 18th, but actually 19th century. And I can also show on this factory my general approach to a building industry. The layout, of course, is not historical. The layout still has to respect the gameplay rules, and I just need to make the factory, well, operational. Which means that it has access to electricity, and it has access to water, it has the sewage sorted out, it has the storage space. But there are also some buildings that are purely decorative, such as this administrative building and this building, which is supposed to represent a villa of the owner of the factory. Of course, it was nationalized in late 1940s, but the villa is still standing. Interestingly, nowadays this factory is probably the largest industrial complex on this whole map, because it was bought by a Finnish company in the 90s or early 2000s, and now it spans roughly this whole area. But here in 1960s, it's pretty much only a paper mill confined on this side of the river. Also, historically, there used to be a narrow gauge railway here, but it was not used from 1940s, so the factory is not now connected to the railway network. Another factory is at Okřížky. There is a brick factory which does not exist today. It was closed in 1970s, but in the 1960s it was still operational, so I included it. There is a historical thing connected to this building, and that has to do with construction. Since there is a construction office in Okřížky, of course it has to have access to materials for the construction. And one of them is asphalt, so I needed to place the asphalt tower somewhere, because there was no asphalt producing plant anywhere near. And this sort of looked like a good place to make it, so there is a factory making asphalt that will provide the construction office. Another part of the industries connected with construction office is this quarry in Nová Ves, which was there historically. However, it was
much smaller. But it seemed like a proper way to fit the gravel unloading station and the concrete station. This piece of industry is not working anymore. This quarry is now filled with water, and it's quite famous spot for swimming and recreation because the water is very, very crisp there. So there is this concrete in Nová Ves. And now we'll get to the specific position of Brtnice. Brtnice is a smaller town, and it was never an industrial one. It had some small industries, like some people working with leather, working with metal, but in the 19th century it pretty much ended because the Třebíč got close to a railway line, and pretty much all the entrepreneurs from Brtnice, Jews mainly, left for Třebíč. But in the 1950s, the communists with the planned economy actually decided to revert the trend, and they built an industrial complex of Snaha Brtnice, which was a leather working factory. They built it right next to the river or stream, Brtnička, and it was in 1960s. It was brand new because it was built in 1950s. Again, it has some connection. Also, I can illustrate that if a factory has some warehouses connected, I included materials. I included the needed materials so that player, don't have to waste that much time trying to set up the production. It's already there. Lastly, there is the issue of Třebíč, and Třebíč has three industrial zones. The first is the city itself, which contains the distillery, and also there would be a leather working factory here. I decided to switch or to cancel and not include the leather working factories here because firstly it would be hard to fit them in with all the necessary infrastructure, and secondly I have a lot of fabric factories on the map already, so it wouldn't really enhance the feel that much. Regarding the distillery, there is a Zon factory, which is in real life not a distillery. It makes soft drinks. The Zon is an abbreviation for zdravotní osvěžující nápoje, which means healthy, refreshing drinks. And if you go to Bohemian-Moravian Highlands, or if you're lucky somewhere else in Czech Republic, you can still buy these soft drinks. It's a typical sort of like old school factory, so it's a part of a city block. It's in the city itself. Apart from that, there is a new industrial area here, and an industrial area that is hidden in the Libuše Valley. I will start with this one because from the 19th century there were again leatherworking factories and manufacturers around this river. Why were they there? Well, since it was leatherworking, they had to be very far from the city because working with leather produces a lot of bad smell. After the First World War, the production skyrocketed, and it was actually bought by Baťa, who is a famous shoemaker from Zlín. They built this colony to house the workers who were working there, and it was pretty prosperous in the 1930s. After the war in the 1940s, all the different companies in this area got merged into a single entity that was called Závody Gustava Klimenta. And actually Závody Gustava Klimenta was one of the largest shoemaker in Czechoslovakia. It was the second biggest producer of shoes in Czechoslovakia, and it was the biggest producer of socks and stockings in Czechoslovakia. So in game, I decided to do a typical combo of 2 clothing factories and 1 fabric factory. I connected it with this sort of like factory train because it makes it look much nicer than if I just did the connection with the forklift connections, and it also allows me to keep this sort of like long shape of the factory. A really interesting historical fact about this factory is that it was created in 1949 by a decree of the president of the Minister of Industry, and he merged all the companies into Závody Gustava Klimenta. Funny thing is that the name of the minister at the time was Gustav Kliment. It was a person born in Třebíč. He was a communist before the war. He was in a concentration camp, and he continued being a politician after the war as well. He got to be the minister, and he then sort of started to name factories after himself, which is really strange, but one has to admire his confidence. Yeah, so there is this leather like shoemaking factory. It has its own like water treatment plant, and well, it's functional. Lastly, there is an industrial area to the east of Třebíč. You can see that it is very recent because it's detached, and it houses 3 or 4 factories depending on how you look at it. Firstly, there is a mechanical components factory, the První brněnská strojírna. První brněnská strojírna is a factory or a business that was based in Brno, but it also had its branch in Třebíč. It produced boilers or just general, parts, metal and steel parts for machines. Then there is a brick factory again, which was chosen simply because I don't know what was included there. It's possible that it was still the První brněnská strojírna and the whole area was just bigger, but I just included the brick factory because again it looks quite nice and quite old. Lastly, there are 2 sawmills which are supposed to represent light industry. The reason for this is that reading the maps, there is written that there was a light industry, but I really don't know which. I suppose it was another clothing factory, but there is already quite a lot of clothing factories present. So I just made this, like huge industrial sawmill complex. And lastly, there is this thing, the vehicle repair station, and of course the farm. And it is the STS, Třebíč, or stanice, strojní traktorová stanice, and this was in the 1960s the sort of like a repair shop for all the agricultural machinery that was used. So it's represented by this repair station and this farm, because at the time the tractors and the heavy machinery, it was not owned by individual villages or their sort of like agricultural cooperations. It was shared and it was heavily centralized. So in this instance it's in Třebíč, it's the STS. There was some other industry that I decided not to include, primarily because it was so small. So there was a factory that was creating nets, I mean, like to catch fish or some or for industries, and some other that were more of workshops than real factories. And this leaves pretty much only one elephant in the room, and that is agriculture. The region was, of course, at the time, it still is, but even more so back then, depending on agriculture. I decided not to include agriculture. I just
I just created a fields here and there to, yeah, because it looks nice. But pretty much every village would have a special building for pigs and another special building for cows. And of course a lot of fields that the people would work on. I decided not to do it because it just wouldn't look nice with the way the fields are represented in game, so the agriculture has been omitted, and there are some agricultural buildings spread around, but it's more of a decorative tool than anything other, really. Yeah, so my idea is that the industry is there. I'm not really sure if it's that usable or profitable, but for example the závody Gustava Klimenta wouldn't really be hard to connect to a railroad network, and then it would be easy to sort of export the resources. But I think it just looks more believable, knowing that there actually is industry, and that the people, even on an empty map, they have somewhere to work in, even though the player is still, you know, confined within this area. And this is where I will leave it for the second part of the video, in which I will cover infrastructure present on the map. If I included it in this video, I would get over 1 hour, which I think is far too long, so I divided it into 2 videos. So be sure to watch the second part of the video to know something about railroad, about roads, about sewage, and about electricity.